Chronicles TV on air. We are now live in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back to the episode of the Great Ace Attorney Chronicles. In the previous episode, we returned to the Garrett residence. We find ourselves a dead body right off the bat. And for today's episode, make sure that like button, push the channel. We're going to investigate this area. Oh, the poor man, so young to die. Do you suppose it was a very painful death, being a poison as he was? I don't know. All we do now hope is that he'll be reborn to a better life. Yes, I suppose you're right. I wonder. Do you think that putting our hands together in a Japanese prayer will help a British soul? Sorry? I made sure that I had a reference ready for such an occasion as this, actually. This book is entitled The Beginner's Guide to Praying for the Departed, the British Way. I'll just reread it now. One moment. There's quite a spine on the book, isn't there? That's gonna be a while. And here we have another disproportionately large machine. It's like this meter of some kind. Oh, this is a gas meter, I think. It seems to be district residents pay for gas as they use it as coins. I see. Yes, now you have a point. I can see that there's a slot here that looks like it will take coins. So you mean if you put a coin here? That's right. That would buy you about 2 hours of gas for lighting and heating. So if you were a poor person with no money, you have to sleep in the freezing cold. Yes, or if you were a scatterbrain with no change because you forgot to exchange your money at the bank. Thank goodness there's no meter in our office. I don't want to see him in the freaking thing again. This is some sort of makeshift stage, I think, isn't it? Where does the audience sit, though, for the nightly Shakespeare performance? Actors aspiring to great stage must practice their art, Mr. Naruhodo. With or without an audience. In fact, on a related note, perhaps you should set up a mock bench for the defense in your office. What? Then you could practice your art every single day. I'll think about it if you promise to don a bread and play the role of the judge. Well, if that would help you to achieve your goal, this I have to see. This is the gas wall light, isn't it? It must be connected to a gas pipe in the wall. Gas lights, a gas stove. London really is a city of gas. Gas it up. But now that I think about it, Mr. and Mrs. Garrett had an open fire on the top floor, didn't they? Oh yes, you're right. I don't recall seeing a gas stove up there. Well, I much prefer a real fire anyway. It's so much cozier. One of the teacups Mr. Shakespeare and his guests drank from last night. Don't go drinking from them, Mr. Naruhodo. There's a bit of poison inside. I'm not planning to drink on anything. Don't worry. Anyway, the cups are both empty. That's true. So, one Mr. Shakespeare's, and the other must be the cup that Mr. Notspear was drinking from. So Seki's-san wasn't poison, of course. Perhaps we should take these to examine them in more detail later. What's this? It looks like a part of an envelope, I think. Yes, I think you may be right. Perhaps it was torn up from the letters or was in it, whatever. Is that significant? Well, it's a little out of place, perhaps, when you look around the room. There's no sign of a letter or the rest of the envelope, and the fact is there. She's right. And yet, here we have the torn up end of the envelope. It just strikes me as unusual. I agree. We better take this, just in case. Anything else? Look at these extravagant bright costumes. Somehow they look out of place in this room, with its grim, shady goings. This one looks a king's attire. A king? I've always dreamt of being a king. Oh, I think you'd be more suited to be a feudal lord. A daimyo or such like. With a chonmage top knot? Every Japanese man wishes he had a chonmage. I don't know what to say. Oh, you look wonderful in one. And you already have the sword. Can you imagine what would happen if I walked around the streets alone with a John Mage and a sword? As we've seen from the outside, the window is completely bricked up. A vestige of the former window tax that the Britons had to pay. What a strange thing they used to tax in Great Britain. I mean, making people pay for the number of windows they had in property? It's extraordinary. It's heartbreaking to think of the poor having to block up the windows just to avoid an affordable tax. Oh! What is it, Mr. Sato? If you look closely, a number of bricks are loose. Oh yes, it looks as though amateur has broken out. A few of them are just here. Was it Mrs. Shenfire who did it? I wonder being the lodger renting this room. Oh, look at this, Mr. Naruhodo. On the outside, there's a little ledge. And there's something on it. What? What's outside? It's so cold outside. You can feel it through this gap. It did snow all last night. It would be cold. Well, more importantly, what is it on the ledge out there? What are those snow-covered lumps? It's more bars of soap. Soap? What are bars of soap doing lined up on the ledge outside the window? I have no idea. But the pair look rather charming like that. Still, that's very strange, isn't it? Bars of soap lined up in the window? I think perhaps we should take one. There's two after all. Oh dear, I suppose we could. Oh, what's this? Look here at the soap. Huh? Do you see the middle there? There's a patch that's a different color. It's sort of transparent, but some sort of fancy design, I suppose? Only in Great Britain? It looks like the Hinamaru flag of Japan, doesn't it? How wonderful. It's probably an expensive brand. Expensive? Then what's it doing in the ramshackle old room? Who dropped the soap? Who dropped the soap? Looks like you're having good snooping around, eh? Inspector Gregson! You're back so soon! After I threw that little Japanese fellow in the clinic, I went and reported to the investigation division. In 5 minutes' time, this place will be condoned off by the yard. Oh, I see. Well, we better be leaving then. Poor Mr. Natsume must be feeling very low, being back in the cell again so soon. What the? Yo! Hey! Yo! What's wrong, Mr. Naruhodo? You okay, buddy? Out, brief candle lies by the walking shadow of poor player. The struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and this head no more. Now, how sounded in the next part? It is a tale told by an idiot full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Indeed, oh happy day! Ooh, Walking Dead! The fella isn't dead at all. What was that nonsense he was saying, though? I think, yes, it was from William Shakespeare's Macbeth. Macbeth, oh Macbeth. A soliloquy from Act 5, Scene 5. Shakespeare. So it was that the victim, Mr. William Shakespeare, came back to life. If the man had indeed been poisoned, it transpired that it hadn't killed him. He was taken by emergency carriage to a nearby hospital for treatment, and Inspector Gregson evicted us from the scene of the crime, whatever that now was. If you give me to be continued right here, I wouldn't be surprised. Okay, we're back here. Hey, isn't that the guy that was from the jury last time? Whatever do you think will happen now? Good question. What a strange situation for Mr. Natsume, arrested for murder, but then the victim comes back to life? I think perhaps the victim was never dead in the first place. It seems very likely that Mr. Shemster did consume poison as we deduce. Well, was it an accident, attempted suicide, or attempted murder? Until the truth can be established, I imagine the police will keep Mr. Nutsbury in custody. I suppose so. Let's hope it doesn't come to anything more than a night in the cells. Oh, what's this? What's the man doing over there? He looks like he's trying to see Saseki-san's lodgings. Is something wrong, Mr. Naruhodo? Excuse me, could we have a word? Was he at the wasn't he a jury? No, he wasn't a jury. He just ran off. I feel sure that I've seen that man somewhere before. Where was it? I do too, but I don't remember. No, he wasn't a jury, but something else. With the exception of the top floor where Mr. and Mrs. Gary lived, all the windows are bricked up. Yes, that's because of an old window tax that was charged on the number of windows property had. In order to pay less tax, the poorer members of society filled in many of their windows. The tax has been since abolished, hasn't it? So the windows could have been opened again, surely. Unfortunately, it would appear that the residents of this district can't afford to pay to have the work done. Yes, that is a sad state of affairs. Especially for the people like poor Natsume, who have to live and cooped up in windowless room. So that's the price you pay for living in very cheap accommodation. It's all seem rather pointless when you put it like that. Alrighty then. Oh, yo, crime scene. Move! I mean, we could go to the residence. They just block up that one room, that's it. We're back here again. Nothing has changed. Here we are again. The eccentric landlord, eccentric top floor abode. We're here because Mr. Garrett's the one who discovered the incident this morning. Don't forget. You chaps, eh? Yes, good morning, sir. Thank you for your cooperation in court yesterday. It was quite a trial. As much for Garrett as anyone really. Came straight back here after all the business at the Bailey yesterday. Didn't expect to wake up to more Bailey nonsense this morning. I wonder if you wouldn't mind telling us exactly what happened to Mr. Garrett. Yes, I suppose you'd like to know all about the dead loss of an actor chap in the ground floor room. Those were exactly Inspector Gregson's words, weren't they? Hey, his face recovered. It must have been a real shock for you this morning. I hear that you discovered what had happened. Well, that hopeless actor chap rises at 5 o'clock sharp every morning without fail. But at 5:30 this morning, he still hadn't lit the gas. So I went down and knocked on his door, but nobody answered. And that's when you broke into his room by kicking down the door. Well, I called on the rum-looking Japanese chap to do the grunt work, of course. Wasn't it a little premature to kick the door down? The man could have just overslept by half an hour. That's very true, Mr. Naruhodo. If 30 minutes oversleeping warrants such behavior, I'd have to kick your down door every morning. Well, you know, better to be safe than sorry and all that. Is it just me, or is he avoiding our gaze now all of a sudden? Except that it was a sorry situation indeed that you found on the far side of the door. The victim's name is Mr. Shamspire, I believe. Is that right? Yes, William Shamspire took the ground floor room 3 months ago now. And how would you describe him? In a word, destitute. Destitute? Well, let's face it, their only redeeming feature of that room is the cheap rent. Anyone wanting to live in a place like this is either broke or has a bally screwed loose. So hard to choose which category Saseki would fall into. Mr. Naruhodo, that's a little rude. He was doing research as well. Research? Into what? Shakespeare, of course. Shakespeare. Read a few plays on the old bard myself, you know. Romeo and Hamlet and all that. Yes, William Shakespeare is England's most highly regarded classical playwright and author. He's known as Sao in Japanese, as you know, and many of his works have already been translated. It seems incredible that Shakespeare was shortened to Sao, though. Someone was too heavy-handed there. There were a lot of costumes in the victim's room actually, weren't there? Of course, Mr. Natsume is a scholar of English literature as well. I imagine he and Mr. Shakespeare would have had much in common. Shakespeare interpretation disagreement leads to shocking murder. Let's hope it's not that. Mr. Naruhodo, really? How rude. After Mr. Natsume's trial yesterday, you came straight back here, I believe, didn't you? Did you notice anything strange between then and this morning? Well, now it must have been about 6 in the evening by the time I got home. Snow was coming down rather heavily, as I remember, and it was completely dark already. That failed actor chap was out at the time. Mr. Garrett noticed there was no light from his room or something, I suppose. I hadn't summoned the energy for anything much, so I just sat in front of the fire up here. It was after 8 before Shakespeare got back. And the chap was up until past 1 in the morning, I'll have you know. Suppose he met his aunt sometime after that. I was asleep by then, so I rather in the dark there. Well, thank you. That was very illuminating. So, is everything alright, Mrs. Sato? Well, I was just thinking it's a little strange, that's all. Mr. Garrideb, you were up here in the room all evening, if I understood correctly? Not a big fan of stairs, not with this blasted leg. Then, how is it that you seem to know? The precise movements of your tenant on the ground floor, I mean. That's a very good point. I can't imagine that you could hear noises from the ground floor all the way up here. I say, I know what you're thinking. It's a belly outrage. I'm an ex-military, don't you know? I don't go around spying on my tenants. Why would I? Because you're bored. And how did you know, Mr. Garrideb? Yeah, what's the gas, woman? The gas tells me everything. The gas? What on earth do you mean, sir? How can the gas tell you anything, let alone everything? Well, as you're probably aware, the gas is supplied to the building by pipes. Yes, I more or less worked that out. Every room in the building is connected by a single pipe to the gas main outside, and the gas supplies gas to the properties via the main. Yes, I understand that too. Let me see if I can explain. Let's say I was to light the gas lamps up here. What do you suppose would happen? Well, obviously the room would get brighter. Exactly, but at the same time, the lights in all the other rooms in the house would dim for a moment. What? They dim? Why? Perhaps it's because when you light a gas lamp, it briefly uses more gas than usual, and that reduces the amount of gas in the pipe for the other lamps that are connected to it. That might explain why the other lamps dim momentarily, might have. Might not it? Yes, of course, because everything's connected to a single sunlight pipe. Is that supposed to happen, though? It sounds rather undesirable. Jolly good point. The gas company's pipes in these parts are pretty hopeless, long worn out, and barely got any gas in them to start with. Opposite also true, of course. Extinguish the lamps up here and they go brighter in the rest of the house. Right, I see. So by watching the flickering of the lamps in one room, you can determine what's happening elsewhere. You've got it. And of course, because when people come back home in the evening, before they go to sleep at night, what they're guaranteed to do is either light or put out the lamps and fires. Clever. Clever. In point of fact, the room on the ground floor and the one above it use slightly different amounts of gas. By watching the lights here closely, I can work out almost exactly what's going on in the whole house. Gosh, that's fascinating, Mr. Garrideb. Absolutely fascinating. Oh, well, nothing to it, really. I can't really see that what's going to help us with the case either. What I'd like to know is why Mr. Garrideb is so interested in what his tenants are up to in the first place. I feel like there's more to it than idle curiosity. Well, we've done as much investigating here as we can, I think. Perhaps we ought to go to the prison and speak with Mr. Natsume again. Good idea. Let's see. Good, I'm not saying you know who here. To the prison we go! Again! Mr. Natsume, have the police finished questioning you now?
Welcome to the Naruhodo Esquire.
Oh, yes?
What is he? Tell me, is he a ghost? Is he here to haunt me?
Let me guess. You're talking about Mr. Sholmes? He's here? He's actually calling himself a great detective, Mr. Natsume. Not a ghost.
But his diabolical deductions, they're not of this world. They've left me. Ah, cursed. I'm cursed, I tell you.
Well, that sort of hurts. Credit where credit is due, Mr. Naruhodo. You were heavily involved in deduction too. Yes, moving on! We have some wonderful news.
Oh?
The victim that we all thought was dead has come back to life again. Now, in the absolute worst case, you could only be tried for attempted murder. That's great, isn't it, Mr. Natsume?
That's terrible.
Oh.
I'm stuck in the cell, suffering from silly wrong end of the stick. You did it, didn't you? Confess, you're a killer. Want the mustache? Constant questions.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Ah, this selfish shyster. Make up your mind. Are you dead or alive? If you are going to come back to life, why bother dying? Wickedly, wishy-washy, William.
Well, it seems likely that Mr. Shamspear was never actually dead in the first place.
Ah, yes, that might make sense. I'm pleased that he's alive, of course. Our lively debate last night was much fun. I'd be sad to think it was our last.
Oh.
Oops.
Mr. Natsume, does this mean that you did see the victim last night? You met with Shamspear, didn't you?
I'm not saying another word. I demand to have a lawyer present.
Who do you think I am? Please, Mr. Natsume, we really need your side of the story.
Why am I cursed like this?
And weren't you the one that requested it? Can you tell us exactly what happened last night then, Mr. Natsume?
There's nothing to tell. But, Mr. Naruhodo Esquire, I'm entirely grateful to you for helping me out with the accursed case yesterday.
The case that saw poor Miss Green hospitalized after she ended up with a knife in her back. It's hard to believe that it was only yesterday.
After the trial was over, I trudged my weary way back to the lowly lodgings. And that evening at past 9, it must have been, I visited Mr. Shamspear.
So, did you go to the victim's room then? As we feared.
I didn't do anything wrong. I'd never been to his room before. It was the first time.
Then what made you decide to go?
I bumped into him when I arrived back at the house. We got chatting and developed a discussion, but he had to go out. So I bade him farewell.
That ties in what Mr. Garrett said. The victim went out and came back after 8.
We met again later that evening at around 9 or just after, when I took him some nice tea I brewed as a gift.
So it was you who brought the tea that had hardly clearly been drunk at the scene then. And I suppose you were discussing the works of the Shakespeare, were you?
Yes, that's right. That's exactly right. Romeo and Juliet. Who was the stronger? It was delightful debate.
I'm sure.
Such a stimulating subject. Shakespeare.
And the debate became very heated, so you slipped poison into Mr. Shamspear's tea?
No, never. Not at all. Team Juliet won. That was me. And when I left his room, the flamboyant fellow was fighting fit. I swear.
Categorically? Mr. Natsume, you often say the same thing about yourself, I've noticed. That you have a cursed existence.
I'm sure I've mentioned this to you before, but I've been here in Great Britain for a year now, and in that time
I already know what the heck's going on with this guy. And we know the freaking stinking curse as it is, so no need to say anymore. Wait a minute. Nah, I don't want to talk about it. they weren't thinking that far ahead in this game. I'm about to say that if the case with old vampire, after the case with Natsume, old vampire took a hiatus once again. So who filled in the spot during that time? But he probably made a comeback again for this upcoming trial. The rent? Obviously, there's a reason why it's cheap, and we already know why, because the room is cursed. Cursed? Cursed how?
The previous occupant, the man who lived there before I took the room, died there. He was only a young man, but one morning he was found dead, and no one could explain why.
Surely no one would want to live in a room with a history like that.
I didn't. When the letting agent recommended the place, I wavered. But I want books. Books cost money, and only history is a small price to pay. When I realized it would mean I had to buy more books, I signed the lease like lightning.
Brave or blinkered?
But after I moved on, I came to realize what I'd done. I realized how horrible that room history really was.
Gosh, was it really so awful? Horrible history. How did the room's horrible history affect you, Mr. Natsume? What happened?
At first, it was just a feeling. The feeling of Betty old eyes boring into my back watching me.
Do you think that might just have been your mind playing tricks on you?
No. My mind doesn't know any tricks. It was someone else. It's been one long nightmare ever since I was given the keys to the place.
A nightmare? You've been having bad dreams, you mean?
All of the souls who died in that room lean over me in my sleep and try to strangle me.
That really is horrible.
And now I come to think of it, it happened again last night too. The very same night that Mr. Shamster was writhing in agony for the poison in his body, I was on the verge of being suffocated silently by those miserable spirits in my room.
You simply must move out of the room as soon as possible.
Yes, you're right, I know it. And that's why I'm already searching for the next room in history to call home.
I think perhaps you should try to avoid combination with any kind of history at all. Otherwise, I'm scared that you yourself may become history. Ew, Sasato knows how to make the man listen. Of course.
Mr. Lord of the Manor is worried about the curse of the room as well.
You mean Mr. Garadeb?
Yes, he knows that people will keep dying there. He'll never be able to rent it out again.
There must be a reason why he keeps such close tabs on the occupants in his let room.
What do you mean? He pays so much attention to the gas lamps?
Oh dear, no, it's nothing to do with you, Mr. Natsume. Please forget I said anything.
Oh, now you're talking about me behind my back as well.
What's important is that Shamspear isn't in fact dead at all. Once he come around, he's able to tell us what happened. We'll be able to get you released.
Yes, please. Oh, I do hope you're right.
Excuse me? Who? Gregsy! Inspector Gregson! I couldn't help overhearing what you just said. On top of that note, I have some good news and some bad news. He's pressing charges? Oh? What you want first?
Always, every time, the bad news comes. When hope is all you have, hold on to it. And the guiding principle.
Right, in that case, the good news it is.
Huh?
Sorry, but it's just a lot easier to exploit everything that way.
Then why did you ask my preference?
As you might have heard, the victim, Shamspear, was just unconscious. He's come around. Yes, we saw it happen, in all terrifying glory.
He's still being treated by the doctors, but we've managed to get a written statement from him already.
Oh, isn't that wonderful, Mr. Natsume?
Oh, thank goodness. It's all over then? I can leave this sombre cell? Sorry, no. That's not on the cards. What?
Why ever not, Inspector?
Mr. Shakespeare has implicated someone as being responsible for what happened last night.
Implicated someone? Oh dear.
You don't mean. I'm sorry to say I do. Yes, he pointed the finger at you, Mr. Natsume. By sweet poison did he seek to end my life. That wicked caitiff, Sasaki Natsume.
No.
So I'm afraid you'll be appearing in court as planned. You'll be waiting to make necessary preparations. Warning. And there he goes again. And so, once again, Soseki-san found himself having to take the dog in the Old Bailey. Whether his room was haunted or whether he just terribly unlucky, I knew I had no choice. The following day, I would represent him in court and do the utmost break the curse that blighted him. Do we get to talk to Shakespeare later on? Alright, like and subscribe, Chronicles, and I'm signing out.